Hello, fellow cosmic traveler. On this epic journey called Humanity's Destiny. It is Monday, June the 8th in the early afternoon from my sunroom in and around High Park near Toronto, and it is time for a little lecture, a multimedia lecture that I'm going to give from here on new worlds and space exploration. That is really the critical content that we're now going to explore. And in a few minutes, I'm going to be taking you through some slides, some images, videos, as I talk and deliver this lecture. And there's also going to be a critical question that we're going to be asking, and we're going to try and explore that as well. And you will see in how we deal with that question something about what really is our destiny for humanity as we go forwards. The one thing I would like to say to you before I begin and talk about the latest developments in space exploration and where we might be going in space in this third millennium, these 2000s, is that what this course should be doing for you, even in this brief, compressed 7-week course, is beginning to shift your perspective a little bit. And I hope that in all that you are doing, in whatever course or program you are in, that when you come to this class, you're not just thinking about the future, about your future and humanity's future, but you're really beginning to open up your perspective, and think more deeply and perhaps more critically. And it's a mindset, and perhaps that will help you in the work that you are doing in these final couple of weeks, in whatever course you may be in. It is so important that we open our minds and we broaden our horizons. That's humanity's destiny in so many ways. Knowledge is our destiny. But at the same time, we have to also recognize in the opening of our horizons, we create new challenges and complex problems that require us to be stronger and smarter and calmer. So let us now begin, and I'm going to take you to the first place, the first destination. And this is something that a student once said to me a number of years ago in my Short History of the World course. In his final assignment, he talked about how he's come to realize the importance of what it means to be human. And this is something that we really need to reflect on at all times in humanity's destiny is what is this thing, being human? What makes us special, we humans, over all the other creatures on this planet? And particularly, most importantly, what makes us special compared to the machines, the technologies, and the tools that we have created and we're creating so rapidly now in this century and this new millennium that are giving us greater and greater powers, and to some, present the challenge of whether human beings have the same place on Earth that they have had in the past if they are creating machines that can outthink them and outperform them and outproduce them. Then it creates the question, well, what does it mean ultimately to be human? And that's something that's going to be running through this entire lecture when we look at space exploration, because I'm going to be showing you what we humans are doing in space and how that's impacting us. And it continually leads us back to the question of, well, what is it that makes us so unique and so special? And how might that be changing as we go into space or not? This semester, in this compressed course, we haven't had time to go into every topic in the kind of detail I normally do, but as you prepare for these final 2 weeks, and particularly if you choose to do the assignment option worth 30%, then I just want to make sure that I give you some important points that you can be reflecting on and perhaps incorporating into your assignment. And what I'm going to be doing at the end of this lecture is actually making some notes, some critical takeaway points for you, and that's something you can use as reference as well. But essentially, those notes and what I'm about to say now can be broken down into really several categories that can help you to think about the future in much more concrete and realistic ways. And first, is history's lessons, which I've sort of touched on, and I'm going to elaborate on a little bit more right now. There's the next big thing that we touched on. Sustainability was something that I certainly explored with you this semester. Together on Earth was that whole talk that I gave on freedom and the threats that we face from a new form of surveillance, what's called surveillance capitalism. And I showed you some of the important thinkers who are involved with that. Science and religion. I didn't really explore that with the depth that I wanted to, but what I will say to you, so you can think about this, is that when we look at the two most important forces, intellectual forces that humans have created on planet Earth, the thing that drives human action starts with what happens in our mind. And the two forces that have really been pushing humanity forwards are the force of science and the force of religion. And what I'd like you to do is reflect on these two forces and think about the difference between science and religion and how these two forces may manifest themselves in the future. What will science look like and what will religion look like? Essentially, when we talk about science, we're talking about the force of humans trying to understand nature as it is. And we have a thing called the scientific method that helps us to understand and predict what is happening in nature. And by predicting those things, we can then begin to develop technologies around them. And the most perhaps dramatic example of that is the electron that drives modern electronics, that sits inside of your computers, inside of your microprocessors. The electron is a subatomic particle that we humans began to understand at the beginning of the 20th century. Just about 100 years ago, we began to really understand it. And we then, by understanding what the electron was, we began to capture it into what are called transistors. And eventually those became the basis of microprocessors and modern electronics. But the idea is that we understood a force in nature, the electron. And then we were able to predict its activity more or less through the scientific method. And then we were able to capture it and begin to develop technologies around it. Another example of this would be the atomic weapon that was used to end the Second World War, that put us into the atomic age after the Second World War. In that case, the scientific discovery was understanding something called nuclear fusion, that when you actually split the atom and take it apart, wrench it apart, you release an enormous amount of energy, and that became the basis of atomic weapons. These things start with scientific discoveries, something in nature that we begin to understand, and then we begin to exploit it for technological development. Religion is something else. Religion is our desire to seek answers to what is our purpose and what are we supposed to be doing here on earth and what makes a good society and who ultimately is in control of our destiny. And science cannot answer that question. Religions can't provide the proof for that, but religion comes from a very deep human desire to understand our purpose. And so we need to recognize that these two forces have been with us since the beginning of human society and will continue to be and will continue to evolve and change into the future. And I'd like you to think about, at least begin to reflect on how might they change. Current event is not something I was able to really explore in detail this semester, but it is something that has been there in one form or another through the classes and the lectures in the way that I've been trying to bring in the world as it is right now, referring to important events that are taking place in the world. Today, in space exploration, I certainly will be referring to a current event, and that will be the most recent lunar expedition in which a Canadian astronaut from the Canadian Space Agency, Jeremy Hansen, was one of the astronauts, and you probably know about that. New Worlds, of course, is what we've started to explore beginning last week. This week, I will now look at this idea of space exploration as well as the important question that it raises. Third millennium has a lot to do with what's going to unfold in the next 1,000 years. I'm not really going to spend much time on that this semester, only to say that New Worlds and Third Millennium really go together because the next 1,000 years, these 2000s, will have a lot to do with what we develop in space, how far we go in space, and what we discover. So, third millennium and the new worlds are inextricably interconnected. The human brain, I hope to touch on that next week if we have time. My hope in this week's class on Wednesday is that we will have a discussion with my short history of the world students and some of you. But we will see how that goes. I may touch on the human brain in this Wednesday's class. I may give a separate lecture on it like today. And then finally, there is this idea, which is very important, and I will touch on at the end of the course, and that is your legacy. What will be your legacy in your life, and what would you like the human legacy to be on planet Earth? So that's just a very brief overview of some of the critical topics that we've covered and I want to continue to cover, but I want to come back to this idea of space exploration and new worlds. Throughout the semester, at the beginning of most classes or lectures, I've often had the live view from the International Space Station to orient ourselves to the idea that we are now in a time in history where we can not only see the planet whole, but we have live, regular broadcasts from space showing us the planet as it is right now. And this perspective, the planet-wide perspective, has led us to begin to think of a kind of new mind that we humans can begin to open ourselves up to when we begin to understand that our planet is real, that it has the vastness and the limitations that we can clearly see. And to give you a sense of that, what I'm going to do right now is read to you from a book that was recently published and has been getting quite a bit of attention, and it's called Orbital. And it's written by a British author, Samantha Harvey, and in it she writes about the orbits that the astronauts on the International Space Station are going through. Every 90 minutes as they go around the planet. And she imagines, with some research, what that is doing to the human mind and the human experience. And it's the first book that really tries to capture what it feels like for a human to be having this new perspective, a perspective that we can have through our imaginations without having to go to the International Space Station, or if we are astronauts and we learn how to think like astronauts, then we can begin to really appreciate what it's like to actually be there, looking out the window and seeing the planet whole. It's so important. And so I'm going to read to you a little passage on this. And it's my hope that in the lecture that I give today, in the sources that I'm drawing from, different sources, the multimedia nature of the different sources will help to give you a much richer and more current, more dynamic sense of the topic. So here's a novelist, a person really thinking about what it's like to have this new perspective of being in a human-made technology, the International Space Station, and being able to go around the planet 27,000 kilometers an hour and to go through around the entire planet in 90 minutes and being able to see that and witness it. What is it like to be part of that incredible cosmic orbit? Well, she writes, the orbit hunts northwards. They're approaching Central America when the twilight zone, that is the Terminator, rushes beneath, dragging morning behind. When the sun rises for the seventh time this day, swift and total, the light reaches them before it reaches Earth, and the craft is a burning bullet. I love that. A burning bullet. Somehow he thinks once you've been on a spacewalk, looking at space through a window is never the same. It's like looking through bars at an animal you once ran with, an animal that could have devoured you, yet chose instead to let you into the flank quivering pulse of its exotic wildness. At first, on her spacewalk last week, she'd felt that she was falling. For a moment, it was terrible. When the hatch is released, when you emerge into it from the airlock and struggle free, when you let go, there are two objects you can see in the universe, the space station and the Earth. Don't look down, you're told. Focus on your hands, on your task until you've adjusted. She looked down. How could she not? The Earth was tumbling beneath her at speed. The naked, startling Earth. From out there, it doesn't have the appearance of a solid thing. Its surface is fluid and lustrous. Then she looked at her hands, which were large and spectral white in their gloves, and she saw her fellow astronaut ahead of her, gliding out against profound darkness, the spectrometer they planned to install floating beside him. And he was a bird released to an unimagined freedom. This is a really interesting force that is going to be emerging more and more as I talk today. And that is what happens to humans when they're in an environment in which they're floating, where gravity is no more, and when they can begin to open themselves to something that is so vast and infinite. It can make them feel small, but it can also enhance their sense of freedom. And freedom, human freedom, the quest for freedom, human liberty, has been with us since the beginning of when we really became human 200,000 years ago. And it has been so much part of our desires and our growth that's led to our progress, but also has created some enormous challenges. This is the view, of course, of the Earth as it is seen from the International Space Station. And you know this view very well because I've been showing it quite a lot this semester. And right now, looks like about 470 kilometers straight above me, more or less, moving at that 27,000 kilometers per hour. We have the International Space Station with astronauts like the one that was just described by Samantha Harvey going over Newfoundland and Labrador in Canada. And I want you to just remember that going into space is something that we don't yet have access to, you and I, who are not astronauts or who don't have the wealth to afford the kinds of missions that do regularly launch now. However, we will. This is where we're going. And the question that I'm going to be asking, but I can essentially frame it for you now so you can begin to think about it, is that yes, there is something in space for the human in terms of our development, in terms of our mindset, in terms of our perspective, that is leading to a new world inside of us. And it's also leading to new worlds that we're beginning to discover elsewhere as well. But the question is, do we really need to do this? Are we really ready to do this? Should we be allocating this kind of energy, resources to going into space when we have so much still to deal with on Earth? And this is something that I'm going to return to. But first, I want to continue to look at this idea of what it means to go into space, to leave the planet, to become the first spacefaring species in terms of sort of the optimistic view, the hopeful view. I want to show you what it's like to go actually inside the International Space Station. And this video comes from just a few months ago when the astronauts up there in the space station actually took a camera through this very small, cramped space to give us a sense of what it's like to be inside the space station. But also, I want you, as you look at this and as I narrate this, to think about what is it taking the human being from a psychological perspective and a physical perspective to be able to be entering into this new world? Think of just how much technology is surrounding the humans here. When we humans work together with our technologies, hand in hand, so to speak, it gives us much greater power to go further, to experience more, and to, of course, as you can see, this astronaut just drifting through beneath the flags, and you see the Canadian flag there as well. The experience of zero gravity um, is something that is new for the human. You might wonder, how do we sleep in the International Space Station? How do we keep ourselves healthy? Well, you're going to see in a moment how we do that. Because we're in a zero gravity environment, our our bones can degrade. We need to stay fit, and we need to be able to function in an environment with so much technology around us. Psychologically, think about what that's taking to be able to withstand the pressure of living inside this very, very small habitat, workplace, sophisticated technology, have no contact with the natural world. You can't feel the wind. You can't feel the heat of the sun on your face. You can't have that same experience of nature that we have all the time. And so when we talk about new worlds and being able to go into these new worlds, we're also talking about a new kind of behavior, new kinds of emotions, and a new way of dealing with the physical demands on our minds. And I would say that for you and me living on Earth, the relevance of this is to demonstrate that we humans are capable of adapting to so many different environments. This is what has given us the ability to grow and develop on this planet over all other creatures, is to go into new environments, hostile environments like this one, and be able to actually, over time, adjust, find the ways, the actions, character that's going to enable us to thrive in a place like this. I want to show you just a few images of the most recent expedition to the moon, in which our Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen joined three other astronauts. And I want to show you a remarkable moment of humanity that happened during this mission. And you may recall that just this year, four astronauts, Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and of course Jeremy Hansen from the Canadian Space Agency, spent several days in space, and they actually went around the moon. It was the first time that humans have been back to the moon since the 1960s, the great Apollo missions. And they were able to take pictures of the moon and experience that environment, not yet land on the moon. That's coming next. But with this mission, the Artemis 2 mission, they just went around, they got close, and they were able to see the moon in a way we haven't seen it before. And some of the pictures, including an eclipse that they saw, as well as, of course, an updated picture of Earth rising over the horizon of the moon right here, which was taken originally in the 1960s, and now we have an updated version in 2026, is one of the most iconic and historic images of our time. And they displayed throughout the mission something that I think really demonstrate what happens to humans when we go into these new worlds. What we need to demonstrate when we go into these new worlds. And that is the ability to work together and to work very closely together, because the challenges, the technical and physical and just general emotional demands of being in this new environment, a hostile environment as well, that is putting such pressure on the human physical form, requires us to uh, be supported by many people. And so the extent of the teamwork that's involved in being able to succeed off the planet is very significant. And one of the things I want to show you is a moment that took place during the voyage, and you may have actually seen this. And I'm just going to bring it to you now. And this was really a stunning moment when the four of them were having one of their live streamed conferences from the spacecraft, and they were constantly describing to the world what they were witnessing on the moon, what they were seeing. And then there was this moment of humanity that I think really demonstrates the kind of character that we humans have to demonstrate when we're going into these new worlds in order to accomplish what we must. And that was the extent of the bond between these four. This is a moment when Jeremy Hansen, you're going to see, is going to tell Reed Wiseman, who's the commander, something very significant, and you might be moved. Listen to this.
Especially meaningful for this crew is a number of years ago we started this journey in our close-knit astronaut family, and we lost a loved one. And there's a feature in a really neat place on the moon, and it is on the near side, far side boundary. In fact, it's just on the near side of that boundary, and so at certain times of the moon's transit around Earth, we will be able to see this from Earth. And so we lost a loved one. Her name was Carol, the spouse of Reed, the mother of Katie and Ellie. And if you want to find this one, you look at Glushko, and it's just to the northwest of that, at the same latitude as Ohm, and it's a bright spot on the moon. And we would like to call it Carol, and you spell that Carroll.
That's Reed Wiseman giving Jeremy a hug. Then the four of them come together. Reed Wiseman, of course, was married to Carol. And
Go.
back there for a second. And you can see Reed on the right beginning to wipe away the tears as Jeremy is telling him, we're going to name that crater, that particular crater that they've just seen after Carol. And I think what this tells you is that no matter how much technology there is in this environment, no matter how great the engineering achievement is, what defines this mission are the people. And what the people bring to it, of course, is their engineering and technical brilliance and resilience to manage themselves in this environment. But ultimately, it's the humanity that bonds them and drives them forwards. And this is a very important lesson that we can take from these kinds of expeditions in which humans go into new worlds. We need each other to be able to accomplish these extraordinarily complex missions. And I think this demonstrates this moment more than any other moment during that great trip that they had. That the driving force here is the humanity that drives them together to be able to achieve more. Think about the amount of support you get in your own life. And when you have others supporting you, it always gives you the ability to do more. We are now beginning to prepare, not just in the United States and Canada and Europe and China and other parts of the world that have their own space agencies, but even in much more ordinary ways, we're beginning to talk about building the first colony on the moon. And I want to show you a video from the European Space Agency that was recently made that just gives a sense of what we are beginning to do in different parts of the world with our different agencies, what the next step is going to be in new worlds. And that next step very likely is going to be within the next 2 to 3 years. We're going to land on the moon and we're going to stay there for a week or two and begin to establish the first colony there. And let me just show you this. The dream of humanity to see what is beyond, above and beyond, to go higher is fundamental to us as humans. And Stan Lee, the great illustrator and who founded Marvel Comics, talked about this idea of Excelsior, Excelsior, the glory of going further, seeing more, wanting to do more. It's part of who we are. So we are now, in the next 2 to 3 years, going to be landing on the moon, and it will look something like this. The Artemis 2 mission that you just saw with Jeremy Hansen and others was just the beginning of subsequent Artemis missions that are going to be taking astronauts onto the surface of the moon. And there will be lunar habitation, lunar research, an extended time for us humans to be staying on the moon. And this is going to extend ourselves, extend your descendants, your children and grandchildren, and maybe even in your lives, you may experience this kind of extended stay. Certainly, you're going to experience this in the next 2 to 3 years. If the United States, its recent announcement, is able to follow through with its moon expedition, they probably will be the first to put humans there in this kind of way, where we're able to stay there for a week or two, and maybe longer, depending on how we can adapt. You see, this is what's so important about New World, is that we have to go there to be able to experience it, to see what we need, so we know what we need to do to adapt. And we can't always do that by just imagining it. We have to do it. We have to be there, and then we will see what we need to go further. And it's going to be your generation and, the generation of your children and grandchildren who are going to be experiencing this increasingly. And it's not just the moon. We are now talking about going to Mars. And this is something that Elon Musk, with his company SpaceX and Blue Origin, Jeffrey Bezos and Amazon and other very wealthy entrepreneurs are trying to do now, is develop the ability to be able to actually go further than the moon. And I want to show you something about what we've been learning about Mars, because we've actually collected through the rover, little spacecraft that, not spacecraft, it's a actual research unit, a little buggy that we landed on Mars, and that has been collecting images and data now for several years and give us a picture of Mars. And I'd like to show you what some of these.
The images in this video are all real. Taken by NASA's Mars rover directly from the surface of the planet.
For the eyes of the world, now look into space, to the moon, and to the planets beyond.
So these are images from different rover captures that we've seen. And you have to remember that we're now beginning to see with our technologies what is out there. And this is something that has never happened in human history. And once you're able to see what's there, you can begin to prepare for this hostile environment down here on Earth. And that's what we've been doing. We're talking about an environment which gravity is also a concern. The temperature, the coldness there is also a concern. And of course, the most critical part of these missions will be the resources that we humans can begin to extract in our ability to go further and see what's on the surface of these planetary bodies. But it's always going to come back to, as we spend more time on um, these landscapes, is are we psychologically prepared for the long period of time living far away from um, Earth with only the communications technology giving us the ability to connect to individuals who are living on this part of the solar system. And so this raises all sorts of technical and engineering challenges, but ultimately it raises psychological challenges for the humans in terms of how we're going to be able to adapt ourselves, how we're going to be able to live together, how will we be able to maintain that cohesion that you saw in the Artemis mission that was so essential for the success of that mission. If we're talking now about not just a few days together in space, but weeks and months, it's going to require enormous psychological resilience and cohesion. And you can see from these kinds of images just how bleak and hostile the landscape is going to be. And this is not imagined. We're actually now seeing the images from these parts of the solar system. And so we can begin to see what the reality really is. I want to talk about for a moment, before I begin to look more deeply at the critical side of space exploration, is just to remind us of where exactly we are in this whole exploration. We're talking about our solar system. That's really as far as we've been able to really extend ourselves at this point. And when we talk about the solar system, let's just remind ourselves of some critical facts, okay? So we always start with the sun. In our solar system, it is the battery and the engine of all life and support systems on the planet. And we have to understand that all of these other celestial bodies are actually moving around the sun, and it's that discovery has only been fairly recent in human history when we've come to understand that so much of this comes back to the sun. So when we talk about leaving the planet, the sun is a critical part of this because if you look at the positioning of the planets, then you will begin to understand something about what we might discover in those other worlds, depending on their proximity to the sun. And I'm going to come back to this in a moment.